Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. So, picture this. If you were to walk into almost any organization right now and ask people what human resources actually does, you'd probably hear a really familiar list. They'd tell you HR processes payroll, runs those onboarding sessions, handles employee complaints, posts job ads, and, organizes the annual training day. And honestly, all of that is entirely true. But here is the secret we're going to unpack today. That's just a description of what HR operates, not what HR is actually for. Today, we're going to completely challenge your preconceived notions of what human resources means and show you why it is the true driver of organizational success. All right, here's our roadmap for today. We'll be looking at beyond the back office, the integrated HR system, admin versus strategic HR, the 4Cs framework, and finally, a real-world case study with Aurora Logistics. Let's dive in. Section 1, Beyond the Back Office. So we really need to dismantle this old stereotype of HR as just, a giant administrative filing cabinet. What does HR actually do? Be honest, what just popped into your head? Is it forms, compliance, endless red tape? As we just mentioned, those are the operational tasks. They're just the mechanisms of the department. But if you focus only on the paperwork, you're missing the entire purpose of the discipline. To really understand HR's true function, we have to look at the fundamental nature of work itself. And this right here brilliantly illustrates the core insight of the entire field. People are not interchangeable. Imagine two completely identical machines running the exact same process, but they're operated by two completely different teams. One team works seamlessly, right? They build a product that customers absolutely love. The other team operates the exact same machine on paper, but they burn out, they fight, and they quietly quit. The machine didn't change at all, the people did. Human resources is the discipline of thoughtfully designing the conditions under which that second team transforms into the first. Now, let's lay down our academic baseline with this definition. Human resource management, or HRM, is the set of policies, practices, and systems that influence employees' behavior, attitudes, and performance. Basically, it's designed to help an organization achieve its goals while actually supporting the people who do the heavy lifting. It's about making consistent, really thoughtful choices about who gets in, how they're developed, and how performance is judged. That thoughtful design, that's the difference between a workplace people respect and one they merely tolerate. Moving right along to Section 2, the integrated HR system. Okay, so you've probably seen these classic functions in a textbook: analyzing and designing jobs, recruiting and selecting the right people, training their skills, managing performance, and handling pay and benefits. But here's the kicker. We can't look at these as isolated silos. You'll study each of these individually, sure, but the absolutely crucial point is the flow. They form this tight, integrated loop. A job is designed, a person is hired, they're trained, they're judged, and they're paid. Pull on any single thread in this system, and you instantly affect all the others. Like, if you change pay alone without looking at the rest of the system, you're going to create turnover. If you change your selection criteria but you don't bother updating your training, you create a misfit. HR works as a complete, interconnected system, or honestly, it just doesn't work at all. Which brings us to Section 3, Admin versus Strategic HR. This is a massive, long-standing tension in the field, and it really comes down to two completely different mindsets. On the left, we've got administrative HR. Did we close the requisition in 30 days? This is activity counting. It's just keeping the engine running and filing the forms. But on the right, we have strategic HR. Are we hiring against our 5-year plan capabilities? Strategic HR actually shapes the workforce so the business can execute its long-term goals. Think about it. If you only look at your turnover rate, that's purely administrative. But if you start asking whether that turnover is concentrated in the critical roles you literally can't afford to lose, now that's strategic. Framing the exact same data differently completely changes the conversation with your executive team. It dictates whether HR gets a seat at the big table or just a desk near the photocopier. We can actually see this evolution just by looking at the vocabulary of the field itself. Words really do matter, and how we talk about workers reveals exactly how we view them. For most of the 20th century, the term was personnel, just a plural, anonymous, totally transactional word for people who are managed defensively. Then, in the 1980s, the shift to human resources started framing people as, a resource to actually be invested in. By the 2000s, human capital signaled that the workforce is a strategic asset, not just an expense on a spreadsheet. And today, many organizations use people and culture to strip away that transactional metaphor entirely. But regardless of whatever label you use, the underlying strategic question stays the same. What does your organization think it owes its people, and what do they owe back? All right, Section 4, the 4Cs framework. So how do we actually evaluate if an HR system is producing real results? We use this super practical tool from Harvard that evaluates any system against 4 key outcomes. First up, commitment. Do employees actually identify with the organization and care about its goals? Second, competence. Does the organization have and actively develop the skills it needs to win? Third is congruence. Is there enough alignment between management, employees, and stakeholders that conflicts can be worked through constructively? And fourth, cost effectiveness. Are these HR programs actually worth the money, time, and energy they're costing us? This lens is a total game changer because it pushes past simple activity counting. You could run 100 training programs a year and still have terrible competence, where it actually counts. The question you must always ask is, what is the system producing, not just what is it doing? Let's look at Section 5, our case study on Aurora Logistics. Let's ground all this theory in reality, right? Meet Sarah. She's a 34-year-old operations supervisor at Aurora, super highly regarded, and she manages a team of 9. When her father fell seriously ill, she requested a phased return arrangement so she could work a few days from home to manage his care. Now, let's see how this plays out under 2 entirely different HR systems. Under Aurora's old administrative HR system, this request was a nightmare. It was treated as a payroll exception, basically a huge favor granted through gritted teeth. Sarah felt totally alienated, her engagement tanked, and within a year, she took an offer from a competitor. But look at the new HR system, which is built around those 4 Cs we just talked about. Here, the request is read strategically. Commitment matters. Flexibility is seen as a feature, not a favor. They actually create a formal supervisor flex framework. Her manager gets coached, and her workload is rebalanced before she even starts the new schedule. The result? Sarah stays. And guys, the financial implications of these 2 approaches are just staggering. Under that old HR system, the recruitment manager simply logged Sarah's departure as voluntary turnover. No big deal, right? Wrong. The total cost to the business to replace her, recruit a successor, and absorb the massive productivity drag during that gap, it was estimated at a whopping 220,000 dirhams. Now, flip the script and contrast that huge turnover cost with the new strategic system. Designing that new flexible work policy, creating the framework, and training the managers cost Aurora roughly 14,000 dirhams. That's it. And not only did they save Sarah, but 2 of her peers who were watching really closely to see how the company handled her situation, they decided to stay too. So averting that turnover saved them at least 3 times the cost of the lost employee. This perfectly, absolutely perfectly illustrates the cost-effectiveness C in our framework. This quote right here sums up the core lesson of the Aurora case perfectly. Same person, same business, 2 HR systems, 2 entirely different outcomes. HR is not just some back-office support function. It is the discipline that directly dictates whether an organization financially succeeds or fails based on how it manages its human capital. But here's the reality check. For HR to be this effective, there is one non-negotiable requirement. HR must understand the strategy. To actually make strategy executable, HR professionals can't just memorize policies and legal frameworks. They have to deeply know what the company is trying to win at, who the competitors are, and where the market pressure is coming from. And this is exactly where the HR business partner model comes in. It requires HR folks to get a little uncomfortable, step out of the central office, and actually spend time on the operational floor. You need to be with the sales teams on the production line, reading the exact same board papers that the executives are reading. Because without that deep, boots-on-the-ground business proximity, HR's advice will always be thin and disconnected. Finally, as you move forward in your studies, I want you to remember that every single HR decision basically sits inside 3 simultaneous frames. Number 1, strategy, what the organization wants to do. Number 2, law, what the organization is legally allowed to do. And number 3, ethics, what the organization considers the right thing to do. An experienced HR practitioner balances all 3 of these in every single conversation. Now, legal compliance, that's the floor. Like safety regulations, it's non-negotiable. But meeting that legal floor is not always the full picture. Sure, you can legally terminate someone with statutory notice, but how that termination is handled in practice massively impacts team morale, your culture, and your brand reputation. The true craft of HR is surfacing these realities early on and navigating that tricky space between what the law allows and what makes the most strategic sense for the organization, ideally long before the legal team ever has to get involved. And that brings us to the end of this explainer. But before you go, I want to leave you with this really crucial question to reflect on as future HR leaders. Where does legal compliance end and ethical practice begin? When those 2 things are in tension, what does true leadership actually look like? I want you to think deeply about that.
And we'll see you in the next explainer, where we tackle the global trends reshaping this very architecture.